Running a tiny opera company is so difficult that the idea of managing something on that scale boggles the mind. Also, and perhaps most important, the international contemporary aesthetic is what it is, and it's not particularly to my taste. I don't think an opera company can single-handedly change an art form which is going through a phase. Art reflects the times. Ours is icy, technical, slick, overproduced, and overmodulated. A caller spoke of the golden 50s. Another listener declared that he's been going since '82 and vehemently voted no. I'm baffled by the extremes of recalling Bing's reign as golden and of a neophyte condemning everything he's seen with the exception of Wozzeck. I began going to the Met in '61, and I remember enduring many awful casts just to hear live opera. Though I miss certain artists, I don't look back on the good old days. The orchestra generally plays better now, and the productions are on a higher level. That doesn't give me goosebumps. The problem is boring singing. The slicker productions and playing cannot replace voice and artistry. Well, at least singers like you and me, Stefan, are exciting. But of course, we're not at the Met. That's from Iris Sif, Vera Galupe-Borsk of La Grande Scena Opera di New York. Madame Galupe-Borsk is too kind to me. To say that she sounds like the offspring of Scotto gotten on callus is not to do her justice. Here's a no vote from Raymond Buchan of Jersey City. Millo has a voice with a great deal of beauty, warmth, and freshness. She is a natural sound that appears to pour out of her with ease. You're not aware of her managing it. She seems to just sing. It's nice to be able to hear a young voice in Verdi. Patrick Badalato, however, disagrees. Listeners may recall that 2 weeks ago we played excerpts from Millo's South American Aida, and listeners took stands about her. She's perhaps the most discussed soprano of today. According to Patrick Badalato, Millo lacks natural flow, fiery intensity. She's just a voice that says nothing. Like others who have come on like gangbusters, in a few seasons she'll have nothing left. According to the pirate Ralph Ferrandina, known as Mr. Tape, Ralph Ferrandina also of legendary recordings, Millo is the only one today worth hearing. She's in the grand tradition. She has a major sound, a rich middle register, and plenty of volume, and she looks good on stage. There's no telling how great she'll become. Is she really as young as she says? We are planning to put out a record with her. That from Ralph Ferrandina of Legendary Recordings. Ralph also voted on the Met, participating in our ongoing referendum. No, he votes. I don't like the singers. A lot of them are mediocre. In the provinces of Italy, France, and Germany, there are better ones. The Met works too closely with Columbia Artists Management. At the old Met, during a spate of Bohème, the Mimi was sung by a different singer at each performance. Today, the Met offers Tosca 15 times with the same tenor. The Vienna State Opera is run like the Met used to be. When they repeat operas, they have cast changes. I don't like the Met's new productions. Today you don't want to see the same production again. I feel this way about today's movies. However, I can see the old classics over and over. Hollywood has come to the Met, and we're stuck with the new productions. Zeffirelli's productions of Falstaff, Cavalleria, and Pagliacci were very good. However, his recent productions were overdone. Bohème is so intimate. Why did he set the singers 50 feet back? While Mario is making love to Tosca, De Fideli has two nuns talking 6 feet away. It could never have happened like that. Instead of the new Tosca production, the Met should have added another opera to the repertory. The Met offers us Dexter's Aida, not Verdi's. What does Dexter really know about Aida? Singers should be their own directors, Ralph Ferrandina continues. Stage directors should take care of the blocking, not the interpretation. I don't like having the musical director in charge of the theater. The Met is making money because of advertising, not quality. I hate the Met being so commercial, even selling umbrellas and t-shirts. The audiences don't know anything. I hate today's critics. They focus on productions. Opera is really about singing. In the old days, even negative criticisms were constructive. Well, when I just spoke Ralph Ferrandina's words, singers should be their own directors, stage directors should take care of the blocking, not the interpretation, I got a resounding bravo from Eugenio Ferdinandi, who's going to be singing live after Tosca Act 3 and chatting here in the studio. Eugenio, I gather that that Ralph Ferrandina's protest there found some resonance in you. You're not fond of today's stage directors?
Thank you, Mr. Stefan Zucker, inviting me tonight. But tell you, I like better to sing than speaking. But this.
Well, perhaps once you've sung, we can return to all these questions and more. Prove the point. In a little while after the third act is ended in the recording that we're playing, he's going to sing E lucevano le stelle. So when you hear E lucevano le stelle, keep that sound in your ears and see what you think when he offers it to you live about 20 minutes later. One more note about Aprile Millo, this one from Gino Mariani, who declares, I hear no hint of caniglia or cigna in Millo's singing. She is bereft of personality and slancio. She doesn't have real drama, just a loud voice. I hope she improves. I hope to be surprised. Unfortunately, I've been disappointed too many times with other singers. I hope she doesn't become somewhat like another Mancini. Mancini had a limited career because of misusing her voice. So spoke Gino Mariani. So we'll be returning to Tosca. Bob Redmond, who also is a stage director, called in to declare yes. Mr. Redmond votes yes in the Met referendum. Ralph Ferrandina is wrong. It is simply not true that there are no great singers today. June Anderson has yet to blossom. People balk at the new, but we have to give upcoming singers a chance. As a stage director, I work with young singers. In San Diego, I worked with Millo. I know that there are exciting singers out there. They see the need to become actors. The audiences demand that, which is why stage directors have become more important than conductors. People want opera to look as good as the movies. The Met is doing a good job, though they declared. When I was with the San Diego Opera Center, Millo applied to become part of the program. This was around 1979. At that time, she knew no languages. She only knew the Aida and Norma arias. She couldn't read music. She had learned them from her mother's records. At the auditions, she sang Ritorna Vincitor and Casta Diva. The Opera Center only wanted singers who had performed roles. They took her into the program because she had a 1 in a million voice. While there, she performed the High Priestess. Then she sang Aida with the Salt Lake City Company. The Opera Center accepted singers until age 30. You had to have a birth certificate. Millo was so young she wouldn't have needed to lie about her age. She couldn't be more than 30 now. So declared Eric Redmond of Legendary Recordings. Cotrubas reminds me of Sills. Several had contended that 2 weeks ago. Cotrubas also reminds me of Sills because she has the same crying quality. Before she came to America, she reminded me of Peters. But by the time Cotrubas came here, the extreme top of her voice was going. I don't find her offensive, but I'm tired of her. Patrick Badalato. Rosina Wolf called in to declare, I find Cotrubas very uninteresting. For her to sing Pace Pace is preposterous. With her voice, it becomes a lullaby. Cotrubas had sung Pace Pace on the recording of... At some moments, I really like Cotrubas's voice. At others, I find it gets a little edgy. Today, the problems overshadow the beauty. Hers is not the kind of voice I respond to with real excitement. I have a weakness for big voices and the dramatic repertory. She's ill-suited to Pace Pace, yet the energy she gives to the music makes it effective. She was more successful there than in some other arias. Pritchard didn't help. He's too sluggish. That's Linda Rhine. Well, with impresario editions and edizione lirica, and head as well of lyric distribution, Ed Rosen is the only straight pirate. The others are big queens. Do my guests have any comments on that? Do you know of other straight pirates?
Well, I think Morgan was straight.
And
Morgan
Blackbeard.
the pirate and Blackbeard, but...
In any event, no votes are worse than any of the others. Ed Rosen, you will recall, is the head of HRE, lyric distribution, edizione lirica, and lyric... I'm getting muddled. He's got so many labels. Anyway, he's got quite a few live performance labels. He added, I think the singing on this recording is marvelous. I put this performance out on my now extinct ERR label about 10 years ago, but my tape wasn't as good. Melodram, on which we're listening to it tonight. It is on Melodram, isn't it?
Fonicetra.
Fonicetra seems to have gotten the original RAI tape. I don't care for Metropolis's conducting. His tempi are erratic, mostly lethargic. His reputation in Italian opera is overrated. Consider the weird tempi in his Ernani. Tebaldi's exciting. I have nothing against Genger and Olivero, but I would opt for more Tebaldi and less of them. When one hears such a performance as tonight's, it makes one realize what we are missing. If you had your choice of every singer in the world, you still couldn't assemble a cast of this magnificence today. It's outrageous that the Met hasn't engaged CAP since 1973. He was their leading basso for 23 years. I heard him a year ago in California in Don Carlo. He sounded much as he does on this recording. Well,
her mother had a lover and a husband, and she was quite the woman.
I had never known that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons Tebaldi gave up the role. Probably because she couldn't sing it anymore, but she stayed in her niche. She didn't go beyond her.
My parents took me to the Met for the first time in 1959, and I did manage to hear Forza with Tebaldi and I think Bergonzi, and I remember that she vocalized the part beautifully. I felt then, and many of my reactions and perceptions have stayed the same over the years, and therefore I think that while I might respond more warmly today, given our environment, I felt then that she was emotionally outside of it. There was a lack of fire, yet the voice was as creamy and opulent as on any of her records. Just in time. Huninen should have been discovered earlier. He's past his prime now. Do people sit on rolls? Pat Pepe has just come back from a honeymoon in Italy. It's Zila, Marilyn Shaw as Musetta. The Met is derelict in not hiring new people soon enough. Either the Met doesn't have its antenna out, or it is excessively locked into advanced casting. Howard Hart called in to say that Howard Hart of IBR, that Peter Hall is doing the Carmen production. Maria Ewing, his wife, will be singing. He thinks the Carmen will be fabulous. On the subject of Carmen, he points out that Clespan canceled this year. Ewing and Isola Jones sang it. Troyanos, however, is the Met's only real Carmen. Singers go on stage to sing, not to be someone's wife. Ewing is a good Cherubino, but no Carmen. I adore Troyanos. The Met misuses her. She is the greatest Carmen today. So declared Howard Hart. Linda Ryan?
It's my understanding that Troyanos does not want to sing Carmen on stage.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
If anyone knows, I'm sure we'd all be eager to find out.
Yes, once we have music playing. Mrs. Stanley Epps, no in the Met referendum. I'm disappointed with the voices. Why don't they get rid of McNeil? It's not that his voice is old, but that it's dry. Milnes sings like an instrument. He's got trills and a pianissimo, but he doesn't carry to the rear of the house. You have to be able to afford orchestra tickets to hear most of them, including Vixel, who is fine on TV. I wish they would use Quilico more. He uses his voice well. He's dramatic and a growing artist. Hines has a hefty voice. Morris and Plishka are like baritones singing bass. They are musical but unexciting. Hines has a manly bass voice. Well, QXR, I just got a call from Westboro, Massachusetts. Warren Humes of that city declared it was a wonderful Forza. I don't like Dimitrova. Westboro is some 30 miles west of Boston. Dimitrova has no warmth. Scotto was much better in Manolesco at the Met, also Freni. Barbara Travis called to declare, I was so busy being a snob and listening to Callis, I never listened to Tebaldi. Perhaps I'll go back to her now. Dimitrova on the telecast, the Turandot telecast, was exquisite, as is this. William Masterson. The divine Magda exhibited incredible pitch problems. Anybody who prefers her pace to Tebaldi's has to be an old age fetishist. Brava Dimitrova. She has sung regularly at La Scala and Vienna for 7 or 8 years, but is not to be heard at the Met. How could anybody vote yes on the Met given that fact? Hers is a voice. Russ Ticer. I like Dimitrova more and more as I hear her. I'm certainly going to be at the Gioconda. She wasn't at her best at the Nabucco because she had her period. I have Russ Ticer on the phone.
As the only female in the studio, I take fierce objection to that remark.
Why?
Because I really don't think that he can make that statement without knowing the woman personally, without knowing what her menstrual cycle is like every month. And I think it's absolutely sexist, and I really object to his making that remark.
Singers commonly report that as a problem.
I'm sure that not every
men.
singer has commented on it, and I'm sure that every singer does not have the same problem every month.
No, but it is a common complaint that I've heard again and again from European and American singers, even from Oriental singers.
I would just like to know how he knows, in fact, that that was the case. Is he quoting her as having made the statement?
He's still on the line, and when we start playing music, no doubt he'll tell me.
And an edge in the upper middle range, but she's got a crude barking way with the chest, and it's very exciting at times. I think that you'll find that these next set of arias, which are from her new recital,
Yeah, this one was recorded about 2 years ago, I think.
In a little weaker state. You'll see what happened as time goes by.
Rosen continued, I don't know any pirates who have made money in the last 3 or 4 years. Were not for pirates, we wouldn't have heard the Callus E flat or Galvani's. Maybe Ralph purchased those possessions with other means, other money from other sources. Listen to Marissa Galvani's attitude about pirates. Jimmy Gladstone, suppose people announced what you have in your house. Pirates do love opera. Eddie Smith was the father of all of the pirates. Mapleson, the grandfather. He stood in the wings or on the catwalk above the stage at the Met. Sometimes we put things out when we know they won't make money, but they are deserving. Well, I'm actually planning to split Opera Fanatic into several volumes. The listener responses comprise only a small section of Opera Fanatic. In any event, in one of the volumes there will be a chapter called The Pirate's Plight, the American so-called private vocal label walks the plank. 16 labels surveyed. From what I can ascertain, in fact, the last few years have been very difficult for them. BJR is going out of business, a pity, because the label's quality has been outstanding, the best services in the business. Legendary Recordings is putting out almost no new releases. Ed Rosen's labels are doing relatively little, much less active than at one time. MRF has put out very little for 18 months, on and on and on. And so I tend to believe that the pirates are in trouble. In any case, in my article, I go into all of this in some detail, setting forward what I take to be the causes for the industry's difficulties. There are quite a few of them by Opera Fanatic, and you'll find lots of detail about that kind of thing. Art Breslin, Columbia artists Gorlinsky, Lombardo, and Shaw. I don't believe the Met knows much about singers in second-string European houses. The Met ought to seek out singers more and not wait for them to be offered to it or climb to the top of the ladder elsewhere. If singing is mediocre at other world-class opera houses, it's because those doing the hiring are making the wrong decisions. The artistic director's first priority should be finding the right performers by listening to tapes and attending auditions and performances. The Met ought to improve its relationships with singers by giving them adequate rehearsal and by having someone to meet them, greet them, and attend to their needs. The Italians, maybe more than the others, need help. When they come here during the winter because of fear of colds, they are reluctant to run around to try to find accommodations at reasonable prices, and end up spending more than they had supposed. The Met should be prepared to spend more for certain singers, even if doing so cuts into the budget in other areas. The Met should somehow offer the best conductors enough rehearsal for them to consent to come. The Met should be willing to humor and mollycoddle its artists if need be. Many of the most interesting singers are very difficult to deal with, even somewhat crazy. You may not be willing to endure unpleasantness or insanity to have a good charone. Tosca can succeed with a merely competent one, but you want Scarpia to sizzle at any cost. Let me generalize from my own experience. When I ran the Association for the Furtherment of Bel Cantos and Opera Company, I often had the fantasy of, in the manner of Joe Papp, not tolerating some of the more trying performers. Yet in the end, for the sake of my priorities, I bore with irresponsible and truculent singers as well as crazies and drunks, and thereby put on some well-sung productions. Several big companies had dropped a gorgeous-voiced baritone because they found him belligerent and unreliable, but I put up with him. I also endured conductors more maddening than any of the singers. Above all, I auditioned 2,200 singers, spending endless hours at it. Some complain that when they audition a couple of hundred singers, their impressions coalesce and they lose track of what they've heard. Well, the person doing the listening should have the ability to audition thoroughly and keep track. And he should understand what he's hearing to the extent that he knows what the singers will be like in different roles. Lastly, consider the example of the late André Pousseur, who flourished during the Bing regime. Not an interesting interpreter, he had greater range and more brilliance on top than any dramatic tenor at the Met ever. But he had difficulty keeping roles in his memory. By the time he succeeded in memorizing one part, he forgot the words to the others. The Met should have coached him day and night. Instead, the company never engaged him. Pousseur never recorded. Well, again, walk on a short pier. What I have in my house is none of your damn business. Do you have something to hide? And then Jimmy Gladstone said, "Bravo, Mr. Tape." That's Ralph Ferrandino of Legendary Recordings, Ed Rosen's competitor. Gladstone also said, "Galvani, your Salome was fabulous. I loved the scream at the end." Erwin Rudetsky phoned in to say, "Last year's La Scala Festival was fantastic. Are you going to do more?" "Yes, probably 3 months of La Scala in the spring. Stay at City Opera. Dynamism the Mets people often lack." Several others have called about her. Linda Rhine heard her a week ago and was swept away. Jonathan Brown heard her and liked her today. He wonders, Jonathan Brown does, Stefan, you're going to review the Bel Canto festival at New York City Opera? Well, I'm afraid not. That creep Susan Wosel won't give me press tickets. She's their press creature. He said of Linda Rourke-Strummer, Jonathan Brown did, "She's 36. When the Met catches up with her, she may be over the hill." Erwin Rudetsky declared Aprile Millo has to learn to pace herself. By the third act of Hernani, he caught the second one. She was tired. Traubel had the problem in Tristan. It's quite a phenomenal talent Millo has. I hope she doesn't burn out. Bampton, when they switched Fachs. Dan Clark called in to declare that Onegin, Sigrid Onegin, is the only one to do Studi de la Vampa with the trills, as written. Russ Tyser said, "Bravo," respecting my own comments of the Met and the referendum generally. "Bravo, you are coming on like Martin Luther, protesting the sale of indulgences. Tape the comments on the front of the Met. The status quo builds on itself." Well, Ed Rosen and pirates generally sometimes get thrashed, whether righteously or otherwise. Anyway, we'll see what...
There are many current operatic artists deserving of our admiration, and at least a few who would have been great stars in any operatic firmament. Joan Sutherland, Marilyn Horne, and Birgit Nielsen come immediately to mind in this respect. But it is an unfortunate fact that such singers are few indeed when compared to the plethora of great singers operating in the early years of this century. Nowhere is this situation more agonizingly apparent than in the field of Wagnerian singing. I can think of only a veritable handful of singers who have made their debut since the end of the Second World War, who can stand comparison with their immediate predecessors, let alone those of an earlier era. I cannot think of a single Wagnerian tenor in that group except for John Vickers, who is only a sometime Wagnerian at best. Meanwhile, we've had thrust upon us a long succession of singing actors, reinterpreters, this and that conductor's vision of Tristan and Isolde, that and this producer's concept of the ring, etc., ad nauseum. All of this is very nice, even interesting, but it does not and cannot obscure the fact that few of today's Wagnerian singers are up to what would have been minimal standards a few decades ago. And now until he pushes it, most of the others, the Spas Venkos and the Manfred Jungs and even Peter Hoffman, very, very limited, I think. I mean, they have the voices to get through it, but they don't sound well. Or they don't sound good, I should say.
Mr. Richardson would like to know in particular about Rainer Goldberg. What do you make of him?
I've only heard him once, and that's in the soundtrack of Parsifal, so I really can't say. I haven't heard him in person. I just can't say.
Some of the early heldentenors from early in the century, that is, Widup comes to mind, some of the ones we heard earlier tonight, have piercing, penetrating voices of intense squillo, ring, ping. They pierced the orchestra with that. Some of the later ones and Melchior had enough volume to surmount all.
Yeah, well, Melchior is a special case, one of a kind. There was never anyone like him before him or since him. But it seems to me that Wagnerian tenor singing, you can watch it going down. You go back to the early '60s, and we didn't think that much of a Jess Thomas in his prime or a James King. And when I listen to James King in particular today, I say, gee, I wish we had James King singing the repertoire at the Met. And you could go back into the 30s and 40s with Max Lorenz. There was a time I didn't think that much of Max Lorenz. The more I listened to him against what we've had for the past 30 years.
On the subject of James King, Joe Pearce, you go farther than some.
I like James King singing. I don't think it was a real top Wagnerian voice, but I like the way he sang. I certainly like the records he made.
Did you think his Cavada Dorsi to Magda Oliveira's Tosca admirable?
I have to be honest with you, I have it, but I no longer remember it. What I remember in that is Magda Oliveira's Tosca.
For good reason. Well,
but he made some very nice recordings, including of a non-Wagnerian nature. The arias, or the aria from Turandot is very well done on his London recital. Certainly he's an excellent Sigmund.
Here on WKCR-FM in New York, 89.9 on the dial, we're listening to the clack leader for Antonio Melandri, the tenor, in the early 30s.
Yeah, but at least he started out as one. He didn't end up as one. One might say that Ettore Parmigiani was the only Italian tenor in history to give a clap rather than get the clap. Oh, God, I wish I hadn't said that, but I did. He's my favorite Tannhäuser, period. It's just that he simply didn't have first-rate vocal equipment to go with his interpretations, but he did last a long time. And there's a story about Richard Tucker being asked, let me change that. There's a story about Enrico Caruso in his dressing room being visited by John McCormick. And John McCormick says, "How is the world's greatest tenor today?" And Caruso answers, "Since when has John McCormick become a baritone?" Then we bring that up 50 years, and there's a story of Richard Tucker being asked, how does it feel to be the world's greatest tenor? And his answer, with complete honesty, it's a very great responsibility. We now have Domingo, who's about the only great tenor left in this world, I suppose. And he's sort of the Italian-French version of Wolfgang Winghasen. Winghasen was around for 25 years, holding up almost the entire Wagner tenor repertoire on his own shoulders, whereas at least Melchior only had to do it at the Met, and he had Max Lorenz and Fritz Krauss and any other number of excellent Wagnerian tenors. I don't mean a larger voice, although it might or might not be, but there's more voice there.
You mean somehow in quality?
Domingo is sort of I don't know. He doesn't get the ultimate out of a role, but he gets a lot out of a lot of roles. And when you consider the variety of what he sings and the places he sings and the number of performances he sings and the other things he does along with it, I find it just simply amazing that the man manages to stand up at the end of a year.
You don't find him glib?
No, I don't think so. I've heard any number of performances with Domingo that I enjoyed very much. And I usually enjoy his records. They're not, as I said, you're not getting a Callas-like interpretation, neither are you getting a George Till interpretation.
Who's next?
He's a marvelous singer, definitely a Helden tenor, but he doesn't sing that much Wagner, really. I think Vickers is one of the great tenors of our time. It's a type of voice I happen to like very much. I wish he had a little more of a ring at the top of his voice, but we can't all be Delmonico. But it's a gorgeous instrument that's lasted a long time. On Jerusalem, I also like Jerusalem, but I don't find it particularly interesting. The best thing I've heard of his, to my way of thinking, was a complete Tales of Hoffmann that had rather limited circulation over here, with Fischer Dieskau as the four villains and of course Jerusalem as Hoffmann. And who was the third singer? I'm sorry. Remedios. Yes. Remedios is another one of those singers, to me, who gets good reviews in England and nowhere else. I don't like him. I don't think he's a first-rate tenor. I'm amazed, and I'm not the only one. I know George Jelinek has commented on this at one point, that there seems to be a different standard in England for English singers, or English singers who make their careers in England, and they seem to put muffs or something on their ears when they listen to their own singers, and they can't do any wrong, and any visiting singer, unless it's a top, a Leone Rissenek or a Domingo type, can't do anything right because they're taking a job away from an English singer.
Do you feel that the charges made in print by Dale Harris, and I think widely believed, that the British critics and Howard Rosenthal of opera in particular are chauvinistic?
Intensely certain of them in particular. Steen isn't, but certain of them, certainly Rosenthal. Rosenthal is another one of those cases of a man who, like many of our own critics in this country, well, let me change that. I often think many of the critics in our own country, I won't name any names, seem to know everything there is to know about music and nothing at all about singing. And Rosenthal, to me, is a man who knows everything there is to know about opera and the history of opera, especially in the British Isles, and still knows nothing about singing after having been exposed to it for a lifetime.
Are you saying simply that he lacks taste, discernment?
I think there are people who don't Everybody has their own idea of what good singing is, but I think there are people who, I knew one when I was a kid, who literally wouldn't recognize the difference between Richard Tucker singing Laudona Mobile and somebody on Ted Mack's Amateur Hour singing Laudona Mobile as long as they both sang the same notes. Simply couldn't tell the difference. They were tenors. Gee, he hit. Listen to the high note he hit. They don't hear wobbles. They don't hear off-pitch singing. They don't hear a lack of interpretation or over-interpretation. But they know everything there is to know about opera.
A couple of seasons back, Rosenthal was slated to come to appraise the Met for Opera magazine. The opera that he decided he was going to review was Forza. The particular night he chose was near the end of the season. Lucina Amara was the Leonora. Well, various people in the Met found out about this, people at the Guild, and they protested that it was unfair for Rosenthal to pick that production, which is just about the oldest in the Met's current repertory, dating back to the early 50s, and that soprano, who dates back beyond the production, to review as the sole example of the Met in what may have been the 82-83 season, if it wasn't the season before. Well, Rosenthal was adamant. He was going to review that evening. A howl was let out by the Metropolitan Opera, people within it, and eventually Rosenthal backed down and picked something else, I forget what.
Well, I didn't know about that, but I do know that he never passes by an opportunity to knock, when he does review anything in this country, to knock the American habit of applauding before the very end of an aria, before the last note of music has died down at the end of the Flower Song or at the end of Celeste Aida. I notice when I've seen broadcasts from Covent Garden, they often applaud before the end of an aria too, or before the music stops, but it doesn't seem to matter. One of the problems is half of the written word on opera seems to come out of England. If you're a record collector in particular, there's Opera Magazine, the Gramophone. They have great currency around, and one is always reading Alan Blythe and Harold Rosenthal and the Rodney Milnes.
Also, are the ones who have say about LP transfers of 78's old records. Theirs is the received opinion.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Writing for many years, and now is writing again for Opus. You can agree or disagree with him, but once you get used to his writing, you always know what he's writing about, and you know whether you can agree or disagree with him, because his opinions are always going to be the same about everything. It isn't, there's nothing fashionable about it.
Well,
I also like, to some extent, Will Crutchfield.
Crutchfield can be interesting. One of the things that makes me squirm about Osborne is that if you read between the lines, he's got an axe to grind, a suppressed premise that he doesn't tell you about. There's one way to sing, his way. He's a voice teacher, and people are praised from the vantage point of his particular vocal technique derived from called Cornelius Reed.
Yeah, but I don't think that's
a very controversial method, and we're not told this in print.
Well, I think you may have been told it at one time, perhaps when he started reviewing for particular magazines, such as John Simon, when he first started reviewing drama for New York Magazine. He didn't start right out reviewing drama. He started out with one or two columns explaining what his ideas of drama were and what his criticism would be, what it would be based on, etc. I think Osborne reviews pretty much the same way. And certainly many of the things he's written over the years are in depth to an extent that no other critic I know of writes, with the exception of people who write full books like Michael Scott or John Steen. And I also think, Michael Scott knows a great deal. John Steen may know a great deal, but he appears to be trying to be all things to all people in his writing, and therefore he's nothing to anyone.
The problem is that no one in the 19th century produced his voice a la Cornelius Reed, a la Conrad Osborne. No one singing in Italy 50 years ago produced his voice that way, and they sang differently from the singers of the 19th century. No one singing in Germany produced his voice in the same way. Osborne's view is that one develops the falsetto separately and the chest voice separately and then somehow blends them, only it never seems to work. They create passaggio problems at the join that the singers never seem to be able to solve.
Of course, you're talking about more technical things, but just for general reviewing in magazines, I would prefer to read Osborne to anyone else currently writing.
Well, except that this vocal technique is in every sentence that the man writes. There's presuppositions that if you know the vocal method, you can see them, and he uses the jargon of that vocal method. And I often wonder how people who are not knowledgeable about vocal techniques are able to decipher it, because the jargon is so weird. Also, there's a particular approach to acting that is enthymematic, that is in all of that, in the form of buried or suppressed premises. And again, there's the jargon of that leaks into the writing. I find it off-putting, and I think that what Osborne should publish is a statement about his presuppositions, and then what he says.
Well, again, I think he may have already done that. It seems to me I've read it somewhere many years ago. I'm talking about many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Something of that nature that he wrote somewhere, possibly in High Fidelity magazine when he used to write for them when it was still a first-rate magazine.
Well, you listen to WKCR-FM in New York. Those of you who were on hold a few minutes
before, of the three, I like Colo the most. I think he has the nicest voice of the three, even though it's pushed out of its real element by the heavier Wagner. Certainly he's been getting good reviews recently in some Siegfrieds he's done. I don't care for Peter Hoffman at all. I like his rock recordings. I can't stand him in Wagner. I have his rock recordings. In fact, I said once I played one at the Vocal Record Collectors Society and explained that the entire membership was about to lose its virginity. They were going to hear a rock record, and they did. And it was certainly better than anything he's done in Wagner, as far as I'm concerned. Manfred Jung, I just don't like. I think it's I don't know. Just to me, it's a nothing voice.
And Joe Russo would like to know, is Bill Violi still with us?
Bill Violi will always be with us. I was speaking.
The voice placed so far forward in The Mask. Mm-hmm. Interesting. If I'd known that when I heard the aforementioned Nielsen cylinder, I wouldn't have thought any sort of vocal method anachronistic. So it certainly has expanded my horizons. Jews with delusions of sophistication and intelligence. Neither has studied a note of music. They deserve one another. Harris has parlayed a Cockney accent into a major American career. So spoke Professor Irving Portner of John Jay College. It's always those who know more than others. I don't know about that. Thomas was the last who could really sing the Wagner tenor roles. The French tenors you played, Joe Pearce, had Wagner's style. In Lohengrin, there are a few snobs who pay lots for records not worth a damn in musical content, and they have such tin ears they don't even know what speed to play those records.
Well, there's nothing wrong with James King. I mentioned that I did like James King, but James King is not really with us anymore for all practical purposes. He also was unfortunate in getting a very late start. I don't believe he made his debut singing till he was about 36 or 37.
Count Goldberg, Lohengrin was Sobinov's role. Kozlovsky went to Russ Riesneck may be the one to replace Caballé in Tosca. There's a rumor current that Millo was offered the part but declined it, feeling it was too soon, too much too soon.
That's a very strange setup anyway for the opening night next year. I wonder sometimes.
Well,
they do the new production this year, then they open the season next year with it.
I'm the unmentionable. I'll avoid Traviata next season. Don't do her justice. Her voice is large. She's phenomenal, though I don't prefer the Bulgarian style of singing. At her London Gioconda, she was spectacular. Let's see. I also agree with Jimmy Gladstone that people should stop quibbling. She's great. She's like Cigna, Mancini, and Cerquetti. People aren't used to voices of such size. You can't expect the same felicities as with a lighter voice. You hear her added maturity on the Angel recording. I'm going to Miami in April to hear her Santuzza. She's wonderful, but she needs work. However, she's one of the greatest today, better than Millo and the soprano who sang Attila at City Opera, about whom many were fussing, though Scott likes those soprani too. Bellissima. We played the Attila aria the other week. However, I generally find her singing a collage of unintegrated sounds, random accentuations, random dynamics, and inert phrasing. There's no proportion or balance between the notes. Her pitches and rhythms are imprecise. She has a slight tendency to get ahead of the beat. Her sound, as well as her diction, are Slavic, not Italian. She doesn't shade her tones, and they are spread and without bloom. Certain notes abruptly take on an edgy vibrato. She does some of the worst scooping since Corelli, particularly in Questa Reggia. She's stolid. I admit I've yet to hear her live.
Other than that, she's fine.
Next week, La Straniera with Scotto, recorded around 1969.
To sit through this static opera, and the camera is terribly busy so that you don't get bored, and they throw all this visual opulence at you. Whereas this film doesn't seem to be in the least ashamed of giving you an opera. They just say, this is Tosca, this is the way it is, enjoy it. Plus, this film has a really great performance, Corelli's performance, which these other films, expensive as they may be, don't have. So it's perhaps more enjoyable, to my way of thinking, than the big super spectaculars we've been getting.
It's uncontrived. You have a feeling that you're very close to Franco. There are no gimmicks. It's not stage-bound, but the camera doesn't cut away. You don't see him singing with his lips closed.
Yeah, it's not apologizing for anything. It's not assuming that you will be bored. It's assuming that you are there because you want to see a good performance of Tosca.
And Cornelia, what do you make of her?
Cornelia, it was the last year, I think, that she sang. She hadn't made any records for more than 10 years, I think. And the soundtrack is extremely kind to her. You get the slancio and the experience and the padronanza di scena. How do you translate that?
The mastery of the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But on the soundtrack, there's infinitely more velvet on those chords than one got in the theater at that time. So it's an exciting and rather flattering performance.
Some interesting people will be there. But I must be one of the few who greatly preferred Scotto after her her switch to a heavier vocal style. In the 50s and 60s, she was a lovely lyric capable of an exquisite Mimi, Adina, and Butterfly, but her travels into upper range for me were excruciating. She was a very capable lyric, but she was not unique. I do agree that after the mid-70s a persistent wobble appeared, and after 1980 a definite vocal decline was very apparent. But warts and all, she was such a beautiful Francesca. What soprano of today could carry that opera on her acting and the ability to create an aura on stage? Caballé? Hardly. Millo, Tommaso, Behrens, Freni? They all have voices in decent shape, but are incapable of being a role on stage. I have a fear that we're reverting back to the old stand and sing style of acting. People like Dorothy Kirsten and Albanese could have given Caballé Tosca lessons. I love your magazine. It's true fun. To shed on Bernini's cancellations of Gioconda and Don Carlo, the part of Eboli at the Met. I remember, years ago, it was rumored that Corelli had throat cancer, and many details were forthcoming about his condition, all of which turned out to be true except for one thing. It wasn't Corelli, but Ettore Bastianini, so you never know. Mark French. I was pleased about Donald Bauer's appreciation of what Scotto has always tried to do. I read Donald Bauer's letter on Scotto during his last intermission. Scotto's always tried to be involved. People don't talk often of Dorothy Kirsten, also mentioned by Bowers, whose fanciulla was marvelous. Donald Hennehan, long ago, should have disqualified himself from reviewing Scotto, Mark French continued. So obvious is Hennehan's prejudice. He always is the Times critic who covers her, and he vilifies her every time. Jonathan Brown has already written a letter about the situation here with the show.
At New York City Opera last season, the way that this is directed in that opera house is that Degria, at the curtain right before they run off, he lunges for her and kisses not her lips or her face or anywhere at that level, but deep into the cleavage of her dress. And Faith Esham as Manoff pulled his head up by the hair and just gave him this long, deep look, and they both ran off together, and of course the place went into screams, and that was a small variation on what normally happens there, where he picks his head up of his own volition.
Screams of laughter?
No, not laughter. Just cheers of I don't know, auxiliary lust, I guess you call it.
Here on WKCR-FM in New York, 89.9 on the dial with...
No, I'm not. And in fact, I walked out of a performance he did of La Boheme at the Met, and only stayed for his Romeo and Juliet out of dedication to the opera, not what he was doing to it.
Mm-hmm. How come?
I just found him very coarse. And the voice itself is certainly a good voice, but what he does with it, he doesn't color. He's usually way too loud. And as an actor, I mean, the best description of him as an actor is after Romeo and Juliet, I walked into my office the next day, and my boss is an opera fan, and wanted to know how I liked the performance, and just from the expression on my face, he started going into a Fonzie imitation, which completely summed up the way that I felt about the performance. I mean, he would have made a wonderful Tybalt, but Romeo, no. The first thing I think is that it sounds like Pavarotti, and then I think, well, it doesn't sound like Pavarotti quite. I know it's Carreras, because he has a lot of the same, I would imagine you'd say the tone or the color, but then he has a lot of the clean line of someone like a Domingo. I don't know whether it's Spanish training or whatever. He's a kind of hybrid of the two of them, so that I can't tell his voice right off the bat, but analyzing it, one tenor versus the other tenor, and combining them and settling on him, I can always recognize it after a moment or two.
No comments from you on Carreras, but comments on other things. Musical illiterate who doesn't even write well. We should form a society for the prevention of cruelty to Scotto. I love the magazine, Opera Fanatic. So spoke Clyde Allen. Fred Sabatini, the best radio opera program in New York. Carreras is a lusty tenor whose voice engenders excitement in the listener. His upper register flies back into the throat instead of remaining in the mask, but he's mastered all the little tenor tricks like spinning a cohesive line and still offering us slancio and little Gigli-like emotional catch in the throat. One of the best of the contemporary tenors, long may he sing. On the subject of the Met, discussed earlier by Fred Sabatini, Barbara Travis added, the Met is not second-rate, but third-rate. I taped it every Saturday for years since they invented tape recording. Now I don't even tune it in. Well, almost no comment tonight on Jose Carreras. Did Anno put you to sleep? The number here surpassed Domingo, who was terrible on today's broadcast. With the right PR push, Carreras might even pass the Big P. On another topic, but they were bitterly disappointed. Ghastly. There were English subtitles without which you wouldn't have understood one word. But even with the subtitles, you didn't know what was going on. Pure gibberish. The music was not 12-tone, but conventional and mindless. So said Bob Connolly. On the same subject, Michael Redmond of the Newark Star Ledger declared to me, too bad Midsummer Marriage is not in ancient Sumerian with no subtitles to ensure that you couldn't understand a word of the libretto. Would somebody ship Francesca Zambello, the stage director, to Dresden, where they like to do perverse and kinky things? So said Michael Redmond. Charlie Handelman declared, Franco Bonisoli was singing Trovatore in Vienna and stopped in the Piera at Madre infelice coro a salvarti. He cried, Wasser, water. They booed. Somebody gave him water, and he sang the high C, O teco almeno. So reported Charlie Handelman. Ken Lane phoned, while Callas's very name recalls the renewed interest in and revitalization of bel canto repertoire, she was even more effective when, as here in Macbeth, she had a role capable of great drama. Her strong personality was a lightning rod to those who wished to antagonize her for newsworthy copy. But like her voice quality or not, she was a unique phenomenon capable of making even the familiar chestnuts come alive. So said Kenneth Lane. Wallace Cutler phoned this on an earlier show at the very end. The remark did not get read. Stefan, you don't leave a comma out. I hear the difference between Melchior and Rainer Goldberg, and I prefer Rainer Goldberg, at least on record. Melchior could bellow high notes so that they'd be heard at the back of the hall. His voice wasn't beautiful. I heard him hundreds of times. I thought Melchior a great singer until I heard Svanholm. Konya did a better Lohengrin than Melchior. Vickers was a better Siegmund than Melchior. Melchior had endurance and could be heard over the orchestra, but the voice was breathy and he bellowed on top. Many connoisseurs didn't think he was that great. Melchior had the in at the Met, however. The programs are interesting. So said Wallace Cutler. A letter here. Wait, it seems to have fallen out of its envelope. Well, here's one from George Friedman. My Kosov of Whitestone. We're all opera insomniacs. Our wives and husbands deserve credit. I vote for Tucker because of his pronunciation, his dramatic singing, his phrasing. Why didn't Cerquetti have a career at the Met? None of us.
Perhaps she stopped singing before there was a chance. She really only sang, how long, 5, 6, 7 years?
A little longer, but not much.
No, I mean, the last thing that I know of her, there's a tape exists of a Nabucco from 1961 from Holland, and she's very bad. If that was the current state of her vocal condition, she had no choice but to stop singing, judging by that performance.
Jimmy Gladstone, Cerquetti is the greatest. Most of her repertory commercially, and those records are widely played. There's relatively little with her live, except from the Met, and for legal reasons we stay clear. Ed, did you have occasion to put Price out on records?
We had a few things. I believe we put out a Vienna Turandot from 61 with Nielsen de Stefano, where Price sings the liu. And also, I think, a Don Giovanni with Karajan conducting from 1960, where Price is the Donna Anna. I believe that's also with Fritz Wunderlich, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, maybe one day we'll play those things.
Right. Stefan, if I just may say, one of the callers wanted the name of one cast member that she...
They certainly don't take the bloom off the voices with excessive rehearsal. Time and again, when I have been there, the performances have clearly not had stage or musical or orchestra rehearsals for some seasons. City Opera sometimes will rehearse the cast for the premiere, and then everyone has to fit in subsequent seasons and just find his or her way on stage. So you find the chorus lagging behind the beat, sometimes at some distance. The Met chorus, by the way, also lags behind the beat, and I think that's because of Stuyvesant and the way he picks choristers. Musicianship is not to the point volume of voice is. At City Opera, the problem is lack of rehearsal. Some of those choristers have never rehearsed their parts with orchestra. You find the singers groping their way, peering at conductors. It's one of the reasons I've criticized the company in the past. Neil Bickford of Brooklyn. Migenes would be a good Maria in West Side Story, but certainly isn't a Salome. The Mephistopheles was passable, the Salome offensive. It's good that you compare the singers of the past, such as Tucker and Corelli, with today's. Migenes Johnson has talent, but is a media creation like Tucano and Battle, pushed by Levine in the manner of Scotto for a few years. George Thompson was a better tenor than the four here. Less exciting than the Italians, but exquisite. Exquisite singing and sound. Di Stefano was a better Edgardo than Tucker. Pressed to choose between the four, Robert Lino picked Corelli for all his faults, saying for all his faults he was exciting. Sutherland also has deplorable taste. Gino Mariani is a good guest. He knows about voices. Well, speaking of hatching plans, Gino and I are speaking about a number of things. Several guests will be involved in the upcoming Magda Olivero and Callis bashes, and Gino will play a particularly conspicuous part in La Scala 50 years ago, also upcoming. Dave Weinberg, what are Ed's views on Jan Pearce? What did Tucker have in the way of consistency and longevity that Pearce didn't?
A voice. No, I mean, I think anyone who saw the two at the Opera House, I'd say almost everybody, would agree that Tucker was a far more brilliant opera singer. Pearce might have been a bit more artistic, even a bit more musicianly than Tucker, although I think Tucker was more musicianly than any of the three other tenors in our little contest. Pearce became known to me before Tucker did, when I first began liking opera, when I was about 15. And he was my favorite tenor for a few years until I heard Tucker on record, and then even more so till I heard Tucker live. I think Tucker was much more brilliant, had the clarion sound needed for the heroic roles that Pearce didn't have. Pearce sounded much better on records usually than he did in the house. And with Tucker, probably the opposite. You had to see him in person to really get the full impact and wallop of that voice.
Pearce did produce many ugly sounds, but I found him compelling emotionally. Jim Burgess, Migenes Johnson leaves me with mixed feelings, and he's going to write a letter about that, which I certainly look forward to. He's one of the more insightful listeners, surely. Ralph Latimer, we love Ed Rosen, too. He's the best co-host. Tucker turns me off with his staccato delivery. He's like Merrill. Who's doing the Tucker in Boston? Andy Gurian phoned to ask that Ed Rosen tell the Tosca details.
The performance was...
Two listeners here, yeah.